Well, nowadays you can get a 4-year university degree and never leave the Santa Clarita Valley. Kind of funny to think it wasn't all that terribly long ago Santa Clarita didn't even have a high school. I'm Leon Warden, and this is Legacy, Santa Clarita's Living History, brought to you by the Santa Clarita Valley Historical Society and SCV TV. You know, we've got a guest with us today who was actually a member of the second graduating class out of the Santa Clarita Valley's first high school in 1950. I'd like to welcome Dean Gallion to the show. Dean, welcome.
Thank you.
So when did you get to Santa Clarita Valley?
I came in 1937, spring of 1937.
How old were you then?
5 years old.
Okay, so why'd your parents want to come way out here?
Well, my dad was an old farmer back in Missouri and had a bad year, drought, and there was no irrigation. So he had a sister in LA that says, well, we can get you a job in California, Firestone Rubber Company. And well, spring 37, we got on a train and came to California.
1937. How many people were living in the Santa Clarita Valley in?
Whew, not very many.
1930. Well, look about like Missouri, except without so much.
No, it was
without
big.
Without the corn and with a
big.
bunch of tumbleweeds.
It was big.
Santa Clarita Valley was big compared to
for Missouri.
Really?
Because we lived in the hollers and hills back there.
Okay.
There wasn't very many people.
So you were used to wide open spaces.
Wide open spaces.
When you came here, where did you live?
Well, we came to L.A.
Okay.
first, and we didn't like it at all.
Why?
Too many people, too many houses. God, we were scared. Took us to, what was it, Echo Park? They called it a lake. It was just a big mud hole to us. Our ponds were bigger than that.
You have real
And then
lakes.
we had rivers back there, you know, White River and
We have a
James
river too. What do you think of our river here? Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a dry river. But we used to have a little water in the back in the old days. But it's not much left now.
Yeah. So why though go from LA to here then?
Well, my dad didn't like it. He worked a week at Firestone Rubber Company, and he says, I just don't like working in that building all day. I don't like working down there.
Were they still vulcanizing tires back then?
Oh, yeah. Recaps. And he says, I don't like it. So one of his relatives says, well, wait till the weekend. I'll take you out to the open country. So he brought us out here to Newhall-Saugus and hunted up one of the bosses and hit him up for a job. He said, yeah, we'd be glad to have you.
One of the bosses at Newhall Land.
Newhall Land. A fellow by the name of Bob Clark.
Okay.
And so we moved out here and stayed in a little court right down the street down here called Shady Auto Court.
Tell me what an auto court is.
Well, it's just a bunch of little old cabins. Not very big, have a kitchen and
I know there was one before you got here. There was one of them at Castaic Junction that got washed away in the St. Francis Dam flood,
Right.
1928.
This one was just down the street down here,
Okay.
ran by Mr. and Mrs. Stearns, Russell Stearns.
So you came out here, but you ended up in Saugus.
Well, we ended up in Castaic.
I know you ended up in Castaic. Didn't you go there by way of Saugus though? Or?
No, we went to Castaic first. And
Okay.
my dad worked for Newhall Land, and they were farming. And most of Newhall Land was farmed by themselves. They had about, 25 or 30 guys working. And they weren't doing that great.
What were they farming?
Mostly dry farming, but we planted sugar beets out where the industrial center is out there. Big field. And my dad's job was irrigating that field and taking care of the sugar beets.
Okay.
It was in April or so, and they're going to be ready to dig pretty quick, you know, and they're going to have him and a guy named Mr. Allen, Dickie Allen's grandpa. He used to run the Honda shop.
Dick Allen Yamaha.
Yeah. So they were irrigating 12 hours each. They split a day. Each worked 24 hours a day they worked. Then when the beets got ready to harvest, well, they brought the horses and stuff in to plow them up. Horses couldn't pull that plow through those sugar beets and all that sand over there. That's because that's where San Francisco Dam came down through. And so they brought a little Big John Deere tractor. It couldn't pull it either. It's too sandy.
Yeah.
So then they went to a little D2 tractor, Caterpillar, and it just walked away with it. And I was a nosy kid. I was down there watching that. I was only 6 or 7 years old, but I loved it.
I'm just trying to get folks think Newhall Land, and of course nowadays that means Valencia and it means houses.
Yeah.
There weren't any Well, I guess there was Burmite houses in the Burmite tract right here in Newhall.
Yeah, and that didn't come till
30s.
about 41 or 42.
Early 40s. So what were the houses? What kind of housing was available then? I mean, we didn't have tract.
Very little. That's why we went to Castaic later. I moved out from the auto court. We found a place in Castaic and moved out there because there wasn't very much around, nothing in Newhall hardly.
Where in Castaic was there to live? I mean,
Oh, there was, everybody thinks there used to be nothing in Castaic, but there's always been something going on because of the truck traffic. So there was always cafes and motels. Oh, they weren't very nice, not like today's motels. Little.
But even in 1937, they were
But
there.
they were great. You had a place to sleep.
Along the Ridge Route, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And along through Castaic. And we had a hardware store up there then.
Oh, yeah.
Foothill Hardware. Had wood floors, oil floors in it.
Oh, whole big.
Nice, and several little old.
Did it rival Newhall in size
Oh,
at the time?
no.
No?
There's probably 50 people lived up there.
Okay.
But it was the help for cafes.
But it was a solid town.
But it
with all
was
the
a
things
solid
that-
little town. And then always something happening. And they were building freeways or the oil fields or then later the dam. There was always something going on because construction workers kept coming in to work in these jobs. And you'd get 3 or 4 to stay out of every job. You know, families liked it and they'd move in.
So you were here when you started school.
Right. Yeah, I went 1 week to Newhall Elementary School from Mrs. Ruth Jones in the kindergarten.
Why all the way from Castaic to Newhall?
Well, because we lived here in the auto court.
Because you were in the auto court. Okay.
And we only stayed here about 2 or 3 weeks, and school had started, and I didn't go the first week.
Right.
Second week, they took me over to kindergarten here in Newhall Elementary.
Kindergarten. Okay. Did you remember anything about that at all?
Oh, yeah, I remember it very good.
What do you remember about
I
it?
hated school. My dad had to walk me to school and force me to stay.
What do you remember about your 1 week at Newhall Elementary School in kindergarten?
Well, I remember the teacher, Ruth Jones,
Oh, yeah?
Mrs. Ruth Jones, and she must have taught at that school about 40 years.
Is that right?
She had every kid in Santa Clarita Valley, I think, in kindergarten, and my kids went to her later on. And she was very nice. They ran the Newhall Ice House, her husband, Wally Jones. And his sister ran the Newhall Hotel, Helen Jones,
Hotel. What hotel was that?
right above the drugstore, Williams Drugstore.
Yeah.
The old Newhall
Okay, so
Hotel.
there was still like where the Swall Hotel was. Back in,
Yeah,
back
that
at
was way
time.
back then.
That was way
Small.
back then. What was the hotel? Do you remember what the name of it was then? In the 30s?
Newhall.
Newhall?
It's Newhall
It's the
Hotel. Right?
hotel, okay.
Helen Jones, very quiet lady.
Today we got the work boots in there.
Yeah.
That's corner Market
Right,
Street
yeah, it's-
and Main Street. now,
Right,
I call it.
it was just our local drugstore.
Okay.
Only place in the whole valley had a soda fountain.
Now that was a hotel there. Was that the only hotel in Newhall?
Oh no, down the street, about a block where where you have breakfast. The
way station?
egg place. There's Soledad Hotel there.
Okay. That's the way station. Where the way
yeah,
station is?
the way station is right there, and
Soledad
it wasn't too nice.
They call it Travelers Cafe, I think.
Yeah, back then it was the old Soledad Cafe and Hotel,
You say it wasn't too nice?
run by Mrs. Macy and her son.
Okay.
And it was okay.
Yeah?
It was a place to stay. And then across the street from them was another old hotel.
Really?
But they tore
Three hotels in Newhall at the same time?
Yeah, they tore it down though, not very long after I was here.
So that's up a block or so.
It was right across
from
the street.
Safeway.
Yeah, a couple of blocks down.
The Safeway then.
Safeway, yeah, it was a Safeway then.
It would have been a Safeway.
And an M&N Market.
Yeah. I guess it was a Bank of
Bank of America.
Bank of America. It wasn't Bank of Italy anymore. That was
No,
before your time.
it was on the other corner, right close to Safeway, just down a little ways. And then a shoe store moved in after they left,
Okay.
and they moved to a new building across the street.
There was Chitwood's Furniture in there?
Chitwood's Furniture was down where the theater is.
Yeah.
And then later they moved out on this end of town where the lumber yard is now. It was a big feed store back then, Potter's Feed Store. And it was a busy place.
So what was there for a 5, 6, 7-year-old kid to do around here?
Very little. That's why I knew a lot about the valley, because I hung around with the grown-ups a lot because they were busy. There was no after-school sports, of course, and no television.
No. Did you listen to radio?
Yeah, I used to Terry and the Pirates,
Okay.
Batman, Superman. That's about it. But we worked.
Everybody sit around the radio in the living room?
Yeah, on Saturday nights, listen to the Grand Ole Opry. And that was about
Take us past your 1 week in Newhall school. Tell us about going to school in Castaic.
well, after that, we moved to Castaic, and it was summertime by then. And so school was out, going to be out, so I didn't start kindergarten there. They said, you might as well wait till the first grade, because it was May by then, school was about out, so I waited and started first grade in Castaic.
So you went to school for 1 week in Newhall, then you took 6 months off.
Well, not quite 6 months, about 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
And then we started school, started in Castaic, and I started first grade.
Now, was there just one school there?
Yeah. One school, and we had 3 classes in each room.
Okay.
First, kindergarten, first and second grade, and then third, fourth, and fifth, and then sixth, seventh, and eighth.
Remember, so there were what?
Went to the 8th grade.
3 or 4 rooms in the
4 rooms.
4-room school. Okay.
And the sheriff, the principal's office, and the nurse had a little office. That was it.
Okay. So you went what? First grade there?
First, second, and third.
First, second,
moved
and
out
third.
in the second and the third grade. We moved back over here to Newhall Ranch,
Oh yeah.
where the Bob's Big Boy used to be.
Well, now was Castaic part of the Newhall Ranch also?
No, but we found a house up there. My dad found a house up there for cheap for sale, lease with a purchase to buy.
Okay.
But we never did really buy the place. We just lived there for $17 a month,
Okay.
which was a lot.
Now, how big was your family? Who was? What?
We had 3 kids.
So you had your mom and your dad.
I was
and
my
3
mom and dad, and I was the oldest, and I had a sister and a brother.
And so, did your mom do something besides being
No.
busy raising the kids?
Oh yeah, just busy
kept
working
your
at
hands full,
home.
huh?
Well, you made a living then. You canned vegetables and fruit, and had big gardens,
Did she sell them?
chicken and rabbits. Yes,
Oh yeah.
I carried 2 quarts of milk to school from the sod farm in Castaic, where it is now, down to Castaic School every day when I walked to school, to a lady named Mrs. Gardner who lived next door to the school.
Okay. So you had a house. What? It was on a bunch of property, or
It had 7 acres.
7 acres in Castaic.
But it had a lot of fruit trees already had been planted, and berry bushes, and rabbit cages, and chickens.
And that was, I guess, typical of all the housing that was out here.
That was, bad. They were scattered. There was nothing close together.
I mean, you had, I guess, homes in Newhall were kind of close together.
What few there was, right behind the main
But everywhere
street.
else, Saugus out to Canyon
Yeah,
Country,
down on
everywhere else.
Walnut Street, there wasn't much. Chestnut wasn't much. Till Burmite come in and started building.
Right.
Bought up all the empty lots that were empty and put houses on them. And then Newhall Land bought quite a few of those houses and had some of their help living in them.
Now, did you end up living in the Newhall Land house?
Yep, we lived in the Newhall Land house till I was out of high school. From the 3rd grade till
Now,
I
you
got through
lived in
school.
the Newhall Ranch house, right? Yeah. So what was your dad? Was your dad the foreman? Or
Yeah, he was kind of the straw boss, they called it. After he got the men all started on their jobs in the morning, made sure they all got out, and got their work going. And then later, they built the scales there, because there was no truck scales to weigh the hay and the vegetables and stuff. Truck drivers had to haul it down to the other side of San Fernando. It was the closest scales.
Okay.
So Newhall Land built the scales there by our house.
And the scale was for weighing the hay.
Weighing hay and vegetables and stuff that they sold by the ton.
Okay.
But the
So how would that work? They would bring it in from the farm, and then it would get weighed
Yeah,
out.
bring it in, and we'd
then what? It would get transferred to a
we'd weigh it,
buyer,
and
or-
they'd sell it to buyers
Right
where
there?
they were taking it. No, on down to the valley, or some I would buy right there, right off the
Tell me
scale.
where there is. I mean, where was the house located?
The bear's sitting right where that cafe is right now, that corner cafe. There's 2 big elm trees that I planted there when I was in 11th grade.
Well, no, wait a second. Where
Still.
are we talking about? The house or the scales?
The house, the scales was out in front,
Okay, so
right along the road.
So the Newhall Ranch, and what we're talking about now is it was the Newhall Ranch house that's moved over to Heritage Junction in Hart.
No, not that one.
not that
that
one.
came from down at the
that
Magic
came
Mountain.
from Magic. Yeah, okay. Then what are we talking about?
This old house, the other were clapboard houses.
Okay.
I mean, they were built with just 1 by 12s, nailed to 2 bys, and plywooded on the inside.
Okay.
But you got,
I take it this house is long gone.
right, oh yeah, long gone. Well, when they put Bob's Big Boy in about Oh gosh, must have been about.
So we're talking about across from the sheriff's station.
Yeah, right there.
So okay.
There's a big cottonwood tree.
Magic Mountain Parkway.
Right on Magic
Valencia
Mountain
Boulevard.
Parkway.
Yeah.
Had a railroad track right across the street. Noble's bookstore was our garden and our cow lot.
That's right.
Right across the street. There's a big gully went down through there.
Yeah, okay.
And we kept a big garden going down
forget
there.
that the train tracks used to run through
That's
town.
right. Every night about 9 o'clock, a train would go by to go into Fillmore, Santa Paula, Ventura.
Yeah, the Saugus Spur line off of where the
Right.
Saugus train station used to
That's
sit.
right. Would run right out
Come
through
right
there.
down, basically down Magic Mountain Parkway. and
Down
out.
Paget Martin,
down
go
to
right on down to Fillmore and Santa
126.
Paula to the packing houses, Piru. And we had a telephone system, party line, 18 people.
Okay.
Newhall Ranch line ran from Saugus to Piru.
Now, fun that must have been.
Oh man, when the phone rang, you could hear them all clicking.
Especially when you're a teenager, huh?
Yeah. The number was 8440, and our address was Route 3, Box 220,
Okay.
Saugus Ventura Road.
Saugus Ventura Road, that's right. There's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
126.
Yeah. So talk to me about your elementary school days.
Well, after we moved over to Saugus, I was kind of happy to get over there because there were a few more kids.
Now, about what grade were you in?
Third grade. Went over to third grade.
Moved into the house that we're talking about
right there
across
at
from
the
the sheriff's
Scales.
station. Yeah, at the Scales.
And I went to Saugus School in the third grade. A few more kids. I had my teacher.
And that was Saugus's only school, too, right?
right down by where the IHOP is down the street down here. Yeah.
It's
The
now-
tower, the old bell tower out in front's about the only part of the old school left.
It's now the Saugus Schoolhouse Emporium.
Right.
Tell me about that bell, because this has been kind of an ongoing conversation. There's this bell up in the Newhall Metrolink station,
Yeah.
in that tower, that some folks think was the original bell.
That might have came out of the old school.
But
I don't really think so.
here's the deal. The school, I mean, you had the St. Francis Dam disaster in 1928.
Yeah.
That school was there like since 1908 or whatever.
Right.
And it had a bell.
That's right.
But then, the way I understand it, that original bell disappeared, and then along about 55 or so, somebody came up with a replacement bell or something, and it sat out in front of the school.
Yep. It was out in
So,
front of the school.
what do you know about this?
I don't know too much about where the bell came from.
Okay.
I'll tell you, but I knew it was there. I seen it there.
Yeah. Was there a bell there when you were? Let's see. This would have been
No.
40s.
It came. Yeah, it came.
You were at Saugus School
I was
in the
school in 40s,
40s.
right through the 40s to the 8th grade. I went from
Was there a
third
bell?
to the 8th grade. No,
There's no bell at the
it
Saugus
came after then.
Okay.
And the bus garage was on the far end of the school.
Okay.
A little what there was there. We only had 3 buses. And Mr. Kellogg owned a ranch right beside the school where Kmart and all that is.
Yeah.
About 80 acres right there. A man named Mr. Kellogg.
Now, what did he do on his ranch?
He grew alfalfa hay.
Okay.
And he stacked it right behind the school.
Okay.
And had a big haystack right there. I worked for him punching wires on the baler, the old hay balers. When he'd bale hay, he'd come and pick up a few kids around. And one guy on one side and one guy on the other side where the bales came out. One guy would punch the wires through, and the guy on the other side tie them. And one kid up on top shoveling the hay into the baler. One on the ground throwing it up to him. And he just used kids, Check-a-neck boys. They live close, so he used them. And I worked for him a little bit.
While you were in school?
While I was in school. Well, yeah, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, long in there.
Yeah, now, Castaic, Saugus Elementary School, did that go up to the 8th grade?
It went to the 8th grade.
It did too, okay. So I know Newhall went to 8th grade. So Saugus went to 8th grade.
Yeah.
And I guess, did Castaic
Sulphur
go to 8th
Springs
grade?
and 8th grade. Castaic went to
Castaic went to 8th
All of
grade,
us
and
went to the
Sulphur
8th
Springs
grade.
School went to 8th grade.
So we did have a little inter-school activities, like little softball, not much. Maybe you played each school one time. Touch football, flag football
Really,
then.
flag football?
Yeah, flag football.
Tackle football in this?
No time. But we could beat everybody because Saugus had a bunch of big farm kids.
Well, I would think everybody had a bunch of farm
They
kids.
did, but Saugus, we just always had
The biggest farm kids.
well, not only the biggest, but maybe the fastest. And we used to give everybody a battle. And we had a little like a little triathlon each year, track. So you did everybody, you can enter all events. The championship ribbon, you got a yellow ribbon every year. I think I got it 3 years.
Really? And you would become an athlete when you got over to Hart, which I want to talk about. But describe Saugus for me. I mean, you had the Kellogg's, where the Kellogg's Ranch, where the
right behind the
Kmart
school.
is today.
Yeah.
Corner of Valencia and what we call or Bouquet now. I guess. Bouquet. Sorry. Then you had the Saugus Elementary School.
Well, right before Mr. Kellogg's Ranch, there was Bouquet Junction. It was run by Mr. Arlen.
And this was a store, a general store?
He had an Arco station. Then it was Richfield.
Richfield.
You know, had 2 pumps or 3.
Yeah.
But he ran a little hot dog beer stand, and he had a little market sitting by it. And Mr. Kellogg had a reservoir right behind it for water storage where he irrigated the fields. So that's where we swam. That was our only swimming pool back in those days. And if you were in good with Mr. Kellogg, you got to swim in the reservoir. It was a cement reservoir. Most of them on the ranch were all mud. You know, so you didn't touch the bottom because you'd stir up the mud.
Okay. You mentioned hotels in Newhall. There were hotels in Saugus too.
Yes, we had the Saugus Hotel, and Mrs. Burkaw, who ran the mercantile store there, she had a little hotel on the side of the store.
Okay. And
later she lived in part of it, and her daughter, Margaret, who was a music teacher at Saugus School.
Burkaw's store, was that the Superette today?
No, it was the other side, right across from the train station.
Okay.
Across the street.
Okay.
And it had wood floors, oiled floors, but kept it very clean. She had a little meat market in there, ran by a man, one of the persons was Mr. Brown, and he cut meat. He'd go in and cut meat at night, and she'd sell it in the daytime.
Okay.
And another fellow named Johnny Seltzer. He lived down just past Saugus by the school. There was a bunch of little houses owned by that Mr. Irwin, I told you, who owned the Bouquet Junction.
Okay.
Big old big guy. And his wife, boy, they were all working fools. And
now, what was the Superette though?
Superette wasn't.
There wasn't
no Superette.
It wasn't there. The building didn't exist.
No, it wasn't even there.
But Saugus Cafe though, it had, didn't it?
Well, it first was Saugus Cafe and Pool Hall, run by Bill Rose and Gracie Rose. And then the little old Saugus Hotel was right beside it. There was a little space between it, right with the Superette.
It was kind of perpendicular to it. Oh, that was a hotel.
Yeah, ran by Red Andrews and Macy.
Okay.
Good old people, good cooks. But they were in partnership with Billy Rose and Gracie Rose, who ran the pool hall and the cafe.
Okay.
They built the Saugus Cafe together.
I want to jump up to before we quit this, and I do want to do 2 parts with you here, if you will. So I want to close out this segment here by jumping up to high school, because we mentioned that going in, and you were in the second graduating class in 1950.
Right.
What did most kids do after the 8th grade? Did they go to school or not?
Yes, most of them went to high school.
Did they?
Just about everybody went to high school.
Was there any other option besides San Fernando High?
No.
No, that was it.
No. Some of the older kids who lived way out in the canyons, they might have stopped. If the folks farmed, they worked with the ranch, worked on the ranch.
But most of them did.
But most of them went to the high school.
Were there buses that ran?
Oh yeah, the kids were out there before daylight, waiting for the bus. I can remember the high school kids. I wasn't in high school, but having little fires because it was cold out there in the wintertime. We have a little fire waiting for the bus to come.
And now, of course, Hart opened in 1945.
Right.
And so the first graduating class graduated in 1949.
That's
famous
right.
49ers, which includes the woman who would become your wife.
Right.
And now, so you must have started at Hart in 1950 then, right? I mean, 1946.
Yeah, right.
So you went into 9th grade in 40, because I know they added one class at a time, right?
One class at a time.
They opened with 9th grade, then the next year they would have the...
Right.
That would become the 10th, and they have a new 9th, and then 11th, 10th,
every
9th.
Every year we had a new...
And then until they got to all 4 years.
All 4 years.
Okay. So you came in and you had, so how many kids were in your high school class?
Oh, in my class there's 50-some, and my
50-some.
wife's class was 60-something.
60. Okay, so a high school had 100 kids.
Yeah, we
when
had
you were there.
at least
Okay.
100 kids or so.
Didn't worry about overcrowding too much.
No, but no. We was on the old Newhall Elementary campus.
Right. That's
On
right.
the old auditorium that they're
How long
redoing.
did they use the Newhall Elementary campus for her?
Well, we were there probably about 3 years. I was only there 2 years. My wife was probably
So you were there
three.
the 50-51 year, and then the 51-52 year you were.
No,
you were
I
on the
was there
Newhall
48.
I keep saying 50.
Yeah, I was there 48
in
and
the
49.
46, you're there 46,
47 and 48, we were on the Newhall campus.
47, 48, okay.
We had the old Quonset huts for the Army had left there from the
right.
war. And they put up 3 temporary buildings, and we used the cafeteria, part of the cafeteria, and the auditorium. We had one up in the film room up top, one down in the auditorium, and one up on the stage classes.
Okay, okay.
And then the rest of them were out in little old buildings.
So Hart High, do you remember when it was that you went over to Hart, the new Hart campus?
When did we go over there?
Yeah.
I would say about the end of 47. We started walking over first from the grammar school
Oh, yeah?
to play football.
Okay.
We practiced right on the end of the field there. No grass, no nothing. People had been dumping their trash there, glass, rocks, dirty, dusty.
So it took them a couple of years after
took
they
a
passed
couple of
that,
years.
after they passed that bond measure to build it. It took them a
Right,
couple
to
of years
build
to
it.
build it.
After Newhall Land donated the land.
Okay.
Newhall Land did a lot for the high school.
Didn't William S. Hart have something to do with
Yes.
donating money or land?
Yeah, he
or
donated
something, or
money
both,
and
or whatever?
stuff. And I wasn't on the committee, but they went to Mr. William S. Hart and got permission to name the school after him and stuff like that.
It was just a little bit before he died.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I wasn't there, but I did go up with the guys to his house once when he was still alive, but I was still in the 8th grade because the coach at Hart, who was bringing those kids along, would pick me up when I was in the 8th grade when they were just 9th graders to play with them on their basketball team and their baseball team. He'd come out to Saugus, pick me up, and take me on the bus with him to the games.
You got to meet Hart?
Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of impression did he leave on you?
Oh, he was an older fellow then. I can remember it seemed like he had long white hair. He sat on a big old couch in there, had a couple dogs by him. I don't remember much else, really.
Yeah.
I remember he had a couple horses out by his house, not up on the hill. We went down below.
Right.
He was standing down below.
The Newhall.
I never went up to his mansion.
Okay, all right. Well, I want to, there's a whole bunch more stuff that I want to talk about, but we're going to do that in a part 2. Our guest today remembers when Newhall Land was a farming company. Dean Gallion, welcome, and talk to me about that. You got here in the Santa Clarita Valley in 1937.
Right.
What was going on here?
Well, Newhall Land was struggling a little bit at that time, but they were farming. And there wasn't everything under irrigation then, just this main little valley right here. Where
Desert seems like a tough place to farm.
Newhall and Saugus, but we had a lot of water.
Yeah.
It was flood irrigation back in those days. So you had borders 30 feet wide, and you put a big old water running down, and it ran down the border.
Where'd the water
water
come from?
Down where the Little League parks are, William S. Hart Ball.
okay.
Had a lot of wells down there.
Down there off the creek side where the Pony League plays.
Pony League's place is. They put a lot of water down there, and it pumped up, and a big ware box right beside where the sheriff's station is now.
Yeah.
Big cement ware box. The water would pump up into there.
So they had pumps.
Yeah. And right out in the middle of the field over about halfway to Newhall, there was booster pumps that pumped it on. They stole water to Newhall and everything.
Okay, so they pumped water from there all the way out to
And that big old ware box that sat by the road had a big cottonwood tree by it, and people would stop and get
Describe
water.
that box. I don't understand what that is.
Well, it was a distribution box, a big cement box, about 20 foot square, 8 foot deep, and the water would pump up from the riverbed into there because every well pumps a little bit of sand.
Right.
And it'd pump up into there, and then they'd distribute it out to the different farmers. You could turn it out to this field or that field, or they sent it. We brought it to Clarita. They brought it clear into Newhall.
Okay.
And
Who owned that? Did
Newhall Land. Okay. And they had people going on the Saugus Ventura Road. Everybody from Castaic, Valverde, all come in this road. And they always stop by there to fill up their jugs and their water. It was the nicest, coolest water you ever seen. Well, it kept a little tin cup hanging there.
Yeah.
So everybody could get a drink.
Yeah. And when you say the Saugus Ventura Road, we're talking about what we call Magic Mountain Parkway today, and go all the way out to down to 126.
Right.
And so your dad worked for Newhall Land.
Newhall Land.
How did that come about?
Well, he didn't like working in L.A. And a relative brought him out here.
You've been making tires at Firestone.
Yeah, working tires. He hated that job. He said, I got enough money in my pocket to get back home.
Okay.
And we're going to go.
Missouri.
To Missouri.
Yeah.
But a relative talked him in, hey, you come out in the weekend, I'll take you out to the ranch. So he took us out here, and my dad liked that. That's more in his line.
What did he like about it?
Well, he was a farmer. No, not all those people. God, we were scared down there in LA. There were too many people.
Too busy.
We come from.
Are you scared today when you go to the mall?
Almost. Well, that's right by our house. See, that mall was right by our house.
That's where your house was. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
They started leasing though then around that area. Leasing out, and they leased it like I say, farmers. First ones I remember big was Haddad and Butler, two fellows, German guys, and they brought a lot of work in the summer. The old Newhall Depot and
So Newhall Land leased out the farming operation.
Right. Started leasing.
Kind of contracted it out.
Yeah, contracted it out. But they furnished, they furnished the water because, of course, the leasers paid for it. You had a waterman that read the meter and charged out the water.
Okay.
And they kept the pipelines up, though, and the houses that were on each little one. That's when they started building these little old houses around on the ranch. And everybody lived in one of them little houses.
It was company town.
It was.
And, of course, I guess Athol McBean would have been the president at that time.
He was the president.
He came in 1930 to save the company. We always hear about how he came in to save the company because you had the stock market crash at 29 and the St. Francis flood at 28. Between those two things, Newhall Land was kind of in trouble.
Yep, Mr. McBean came in and kind of saved the company.
Yeah, so what do you remember about him?
Him and the Chesebroughs and the Newhalls.
Right. What do you remember about any of them?
I don't remember too much about Mr. Athol McBean, but I knew his son, Peter McBean.
Peter McBean?
Jr.
Yeah.
He came out, and I worked for him a little, irrigating different spots for him. He had horses, and he'd want to keep his horses. And, Dean, can you come down and do this field for me, take care of them? And I'd do that while I was in school.
So what is it that you would do?
Oh, I'd irrigate the permanent pasture. Back over in the hills over here, he had a place.
Well, which was done how? I mean, we didn't have sprinklers or whatever.
No, you like I say, you just turned it loose and let it run. Okay. You made borders. Pulled up a border about that high, and it'd run down through those borders. And as the water ran through the borders down to the end, it took quite a while, especially if you're in a sandy field. Well, the gophers would get drowned out and climb up on the borders, and I'd kill them suckers.
How'd you kill the gophers?
Cut the tails off, and I got a nickel apiece for the gophers. Later, the welder on the ranch made me an old Cushman scooter. He put a third wheel on it, because there wasn't any back then, just an old two-wheel scooter. But he put a little box and a third wheel, and I had about 100 traps. And I'd trap gophers between Newhall and Saugus. Sometimes I could catch 100 gophers a day, make more than my dad did.
Seems like a losing proposition.
But they washed the roads out. The gophers would get along the sides of the field, and the road would wash out, and then the water would go down into the ground instead of going watering the crop. So we had to get rid of all those gophers.
So why didn't you use rat poison or something?
Well, that wasn't too popular back then. We did use a lot of poison, grasshoppers and stuff. I mean, I remember mixing it up in the back of a bed of a pickup.
You mean to kill off the locusts?
To kill off the locusts. And he'd drive along, I'd drive along, a couple of guys in the back scattering it out. Kill all, especially over where the golf course is. Down through there, a lot of grasshopper, locusts.
What'd you use to kill them?
Something's not legal anymore.
Okay.
DDT or something like that.
Yeah.
And then we had big irrigation.
Agent Orange? No.
Yeah. No, that wasn't then. There wasn't any of that then. We had big irrigation ditches. Big irrigation ditches where the water would run. They had a big plow, about a 5 foot, they'd plow a ditch 5 foot deep. Took 3 tractors to pull it, 3 big tractors, D7s. And they'd divide the fields with this and catch the runoff water and pump it back to somebody else.
Yeah. So of course they weren't even thinking about doing any homes then.
No. Well, on that Saugus Ventura Road, or 126 now, Magic Mountain, there was 1, 2, 3. And then down at the Edison Company down there on the corner, they had 6 little homes. I think they got a couple over in Heritage Village.
The ones over in...
Yeah, they had 6.
They were on Edison Curve.
Right, there's 6. 3 on each side of the street.
Right.
And then past them, General Petroleum had 3 bigger homes for their oil company guys.
Yeah, now in the 1930s, there was starting to be quite a bit more oil operation.
Right, yeah, they started bringing some oil down from Bakersfield. And then they hit that big field out there in Pico Canyon. Sunray and Barnstall. I think it came in first as Barnstall, and then turned to Sunray,
Canyon right
Sunray,
over the hill.
and and then Humble Oil come in a few years later, where Magic Mountain is. They got flowing oil wells and made Newhall Land great.
Yeah, and it wasn't until the 40s, the late 40s, that you had Confusion Hill off of
Real late 40s,
Yeah, 48,
a lot of the
49,
high school kids worked over in there. And I worked over there some.
I guess you would have been in high school when that was going on, too.
Yeah, I worked over there a little.
Doing what?
Pulling those little oil wells, working on them for little oil companies.
How were they drilling oil wells at that time?
I never worked in the drilling department. I was in production. After they drilled the wells, we'd come on and run pipe and tubing in them, and then run sucker rods down in them for the. You see that horse's head going up and down? That's pumping the oil out on those rods. But once in a while over there in Clarita, that oil was so thick, like molasses, that you had to thin the oil to get it out of the ground. So they started heating it. But you could be working on a well, go move in and work on a well. Yeah. And by nighttime, when you went to go out that road, there'd be another rig setting up in the road because they swarmed it. Yeah. Like bees over there.
Yeah. I guess there was a lot of claim jumping.
Oh, a lot like that.
How did you heat up the oil? I mean, were they using a steam injection way back then?
No. They usually pumped oil, kerosene, or diesel down in them to thin it up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's how you thinned it up. Now they're using the steam injection and stuff.
Right.
But not then. They started quite a while back. Probably in the 50s they started. Late 50s they started using steam. But before they used hot oil. The big rigs would come in and heat the oil right in the rig, and then ran hollow rod down, run that hot oil down about 300 or 400 feet or more, a little more, and let it spread out. Of course, the wells in Clarita aren't very deep, you know. Right. They're only 4,000, 5,000 feet, the biggest probably.
What types of crops were growing on the Newhall Ranch?
Well, the first I remember was the potatoes and then asparagus. Jujo, the asparagus boy, come out, and he planted asparagus from right there at Saugus, when they'd finished with the potatoes, the Chinaman, Jujo, would put in asparagus crops, because potatoes like new ground. They like fresh ground. They grow better, bigger, nicer potato. But after that, he'd put asparagus in.
So they were rotating the crops?
Yeah, rotating, and it'd do good for 3 or 4 years. So he'd do the asparagus, and then they'd put alfalfa in, because alfalfa had a lot of nitrogen. It would redo the soil, and they could come back and plant other things again.
Really? And this was going on when? I mean, what are the areas today? I mean, we're looking at all of Valencia, basically.
All between Newhall and Saugus. All those fields right through there. And of course, down where Magic Mountain is was the feed yards. And the alfalfa, all they grew, they took, plus they bought a lot more.
Now the feed yards were where exactly?
Right where Magic Mountain is.
Magic Mountain Amusement Park.
Big feed yard, they feed probably, back then they were probably feeding about 8,000 to 10,000 head.
Of cattle?
Of cattle for Safeway stores.
Okay.
Was their biggest thing.
8,000 to 10,000?
Yeah, a lot.
Really?
You can't believe it.
That is a lot.
And I worked down there some on Saturdays.
Where did they run? Did they?
Oh, they did. They kept them in pens. There was a feeding. They had big cement troughs, and they dumped that feed in those troughs. All the cow could eat all day.
When you drive up I-5, did this place look like Harris Ranch or something?
Yeah, like you know that when it's up on I-5? Yeah. It was something like that.
Like something like that?
Only I think it was kept a little better.
Yeah.
They bought that, but Newhall Land ran that themselves.
Newhall Land had pigs at that time?
Well, that's another story, yes. And when I was in the third grade at Saugus School, Newhall Land decided they're going to try pigs. So they hired a pig expert from Oklahoma, a guy named Bill Starkey. He had a boy my age in Saugus School and a daughter, a little younger. And he came out and put in cement sheds and everything for the pigs and slabs. And they started raising pigs. And they had pigs about the first year, and in the second year they all started having litters of pigs, and God, they had pigs everywhere running down there. Turned out the guy didn't know that much as he thought he did. Come time to, when you have small pigs, as they get a couple months old, they've got to be castrated, you know, to make good pork and ham. And he hired some guys to come in and do this, and he was supposed to know how. But he wasn't making much progress. We had a big shop there by our house where they did all the work, and the man that was running this, the head of it was Mr. Henry Poole down there. And he came in with the shop one day, and I happened to be there, and the guys were eating their lunch, and he says, I'm never going to get those pigs done. Never going to get this taken care of. And an old man there, Mr. Moore, was real old. I think he said he was in the war, Civil War. Later, I bought a 45-70 gun rifle from him, and he said it was in the war. I still have it.
Is that right?
And he says, we got a guy right here, Mr. Poole, can get you out of that trouble. He says, no way. And he said, yeah, you give him a couple guys to catch those pigs, and he'll have them done in a week. So he said, well, who's that? And he says, Mr. Gallion, D. Gallion. That was my dad, because he had worked in a slaughterhouse in Missouri. And he'd worked doing that kind of work. And so he went down there and did all those pigs. When a cow would get hurt in the feed yards, he'd go down and butcher it, and they'd pass the meat out to all the people. You know, one a horn or a broken leg, or they didn't do any sick ones or anything. But, but my dad was skilled at that kind of stuff, and he was a good farmer. He never only went to the 4th grade in school, so he could read, and they couldn't write very well. But he could read, and so that's why I never got to be a big boss. But he knew how to handle men. He could get the guys out on the job, put in the pipelines, disc and plow the fields and plant the crops.
Now you're saying his name is what?
D. Gallion. D-double-E.
D-double-E. Okay.
D. Gallion.
Okay. And I guess he got those pigs done pretty quick then.
Oh, he got them done in less than a week. They couldn't believe it. Mr. Starkey was no longer there after that, and they got rid of the pigs the next year.
Yeah.
They decided that wasn't a profitable thing.
Did they have any other kind of livestock?
Well, they had...
Did they bother with chickens or anything like that?
No, they never did have chickens. They had horses at first for their farming use.
Right.
And then with the cattle down there, they had maybe 20 horses for the cowboys. They had cowboys out in the range.
How many cowboys did they have at that time?
I'd say they probably had about 7 or 8. But at the mill, where they fed and everything, there was just the mill workers took care of everything there. But the cowboys were out like up on Oat Mountain and down Torrey, all down through there in the wash.
Now the cowboys live here?
Potreros, they lived here, Frankie Villa, one of Rudy Cordova's uncles.
Oh, is that right?
Was over there. And they had quite a few cowboys, and they also had sheep. They grew sheep. Okay. We had about 3 bands of sheep, as I remember.
How much is a band?
Oh, probably about 1,000 in each band. And that was good because they could graze off the fields in the wintertime. You know, when there was nothing growing, they'd bring move those bands of sheep around and graze all that down, clean it up, kept the weeds down.
I thought nesters and cowboys didn't mix too well.
Well, they did with the Newhall Land.
Yeah.
They usually had Bass sheep herders or
Basque?
Yeah, and they had the little trailers and their dogs. And when I was 13 or 14, starting to drive, I'd take them to town on Saturday to Safeway store to buy their bread and their beer and stuff, and they lived out in those little trailers. Over where Valencia High is, all those little hills through there, that was all dry farming then. There was no water over there.
Okay.
So they had run their sheep. We had a sheep camp over there for wintertime where they took them to lamb to have their babies. Had a big barn and little cows.
Now, did the water availability, the water situation, did that
There.
that ever change? I mean, up until like, 1960s.
We had so much
when
water, we didn't know what to do with it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was no shortage of water.
Because there was nobody living here to drink it, or what?
Well, and we built they built dikes in the river in the wintertime.
Yeah.
They had to run big dikes like Castaic and catch water behind these dikes until it got so much, and then they'd go over them. But they still saved a lot of water. It went into the ground.
So the irrigation was done the same way for up until...
Same way until the sprinklers came in. And that saved a lot of water. It was all irrigated.
Like when did that happen?
Oh, that probably came in the 50s.
Okay. And by this time, you're out of high school now.
Yeah, and then they're starting sprinkling, and the alfalfa hay came in big. Dairy farming. Now, we had probably, well, I can remember 1, 2, 3, 4 dairies here in our valley.
Yeah.
Dairy farms where they didn't, more than that, or 5. And then they took it into Burbank Creamery.
Burbank Creamery and Placerita Canyon.
Yeah, and Placerita. All those were dairies, and they grew a lot of hay. The ranch, and the guy, Silver Shield Dairy Farms, big leaser, and Bill Clark, where Saugus High School is, built a dairy right there. And he leased and grew a lot of alfalfa hay.
Okay.
And I weighed all that, see, on the scales.
Yeah, the scales were there, and your house was there.
And my house was right next door to it.
Basically, Valencia and Magic Mountain. Where the old Bob's Big Boy used to be.
Right.
After that.
I had a window in my bedroom, big window, and the guys, when they'd pull into the scales at night, early in the mornings, because they'd like to get the hay when they had dew on it, because it weighed more, and the cattle liked it better. It was fresher. So they'd come and knock on my window, and I'd go weigh them in. And I didn't want to go through the house and wake everybody else up, and I got a quarter for every truck I weighed.
Now you're weighing the hay and crops and whatever, and you're doing that for Newhall Land, so the Newhall Land knows how much it's shipping out, or
so the leasers would get paid by the ticket I made.
Oh, okay.
I was a public.
Was it all done by lessors? Did Newhall Land do any of its own farming?
Yeah,
or was it all
first in the late 30s and early 40s they did, but then it went to leasing after that.
It was all leasing after that. Okay.
Except for the orchard part down there, they kept the orchards going.
So these were actual. So Newhall Land owned the livestock.
Yeah.
And so this was basically contracted out. The farming of it and production, whatever, was contracted out.
After the late 40s, they started contracting those out.
Okay, so it's not like these people would lease land and have their own cows.
Thousands of acres. Nobody had their own cows.
Right.
They just leased it out for farming, and they'd sell all the stuff.
And so they'd weigh it and get paid based on that.
Based on so much a ton.
And then who would take it to market?
Well, Newhall, they'd ship out on the railroad. Newhall Land would ship all those things. They would have trucks, the leasers would have trucks going down to L.A. market. When they grew cantaloupes, tomatoes, watermelons, Okay. There would be a couple of trucks going probably every night during farming season. Corn, Boscovich, Tapia, all their corn, they'd ship it in at nights in trucks to L.A. market.
Mike and Sue Urosic, when did they get here?
Mike and Margaret.
When do they start carrots?
Oh, let's see.
The 50s?
Yeah, about probably a little before the 50s. About the 50s. About the 50s. They moved in here.
Now, people got here and bought new homes when they were brand new in the 70s. They saw onions. When did onion farming start?
Well, onions came later, because I guess onions will grow in anything. So after they depleted the soil of most...
But they don't grow under the canopy of an oak tree, and therefore Francisco Lopez cannot have been sitting under an oak tree and dig up a wild onion because they don't grow there.
That's what it sounds like, because they need sun.
Yeah. So, sorry, onion, that was a segue. Onions.
Onions came, like you say, probably... 50s, late 50s, or in the 50s.
Okay.
Carrots came a little before that, Urosics, brothers. Johnny Urosic, and then he brought 2 brothers, twins, big boys. And they stayed here till about 60-something. And then they all moved to Bakersfield, all our leasing, all our farmland started turning into houses.
Yeah, they were here quite late. I think
they were quite late. They had a Bunny Love carrot shed down where the boys' baseball field is. And then they moved up to Wheeler Ridge.
Where the water came from.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
I know that a long time ago, some people in the Santa Clara River Valley corridor here were growing wheat. Did they grow wheat on...
Wheat?
Wheat, yeah. Did they grow wheat on Newhall Land, or wheat or barley?
A lot of barley.
Barley.
But that went down to the feed mill, most of it.
Where was that?
Down to the Magic Mountain, where they fed the cattle.
Oh, to the feed, yeah.
Yeah,
to the
they
feed
had
mill,
big
right.
silos down there. We'd haul it, and they'd buy a lot. Come in on the Spur track down here at Saugus. Right, they'd come in boxcars, big loads of barley and wheat and milo maize, corn. That was a bad job.
Milo maize.
Yeah.
There's something I haven't heard in a long time.
You'd get out there. We had trucks. We had 3 trucks. 2-ton trucks and big beds on them. We'd pull into those cars and back up as close as you can get to the car. Shovel that stuff in there. Can you believe that? A nasty job because it was dusty, you know, the chafe and stuff off of it.
Right.
Really be bad. And I usually got stuck back in the end because the farm boys, the dads and guys, they'd get up at the door, so they shovel.
But that was while you were in school. You never, you managed to avoid going into the family business.
I didn't get into the family business.
No.
My brother did. He stayed there 43 years.
And what'd you do after your brother did? What was his name?
JD.
JD, okay.
He lived in the whole house that's down there at the feed mill.
Okay. He lived in the Newhall Ranch house, the one that's now at Heritage Junction. Okay.
Yeah. And
there was
here,
a Gallion
on
in
the
there
ranch,
somewhere. Yeah.
That was my brother. He stayed with him 43 years, but he later went into building.
That was a big house.
Huh?
That was a big house.
That was a big house. That was the biggest house. That was down there, well, the cowboys and the guys that worked at the feed mill stayed in it. And they had
stayed
rooms,
too.
you know.
Okay.
Mrs. Poole, the guy's wife, cooked for him, and they stayed upstairs and all those things. He had one daughter, Mr. Poole, Barbara, good-looking girl. And he'd invite me down on Saturdays to go down and work. And we never had any money. We were a very poor family. But we had a lot of food, and I always had pocket money because I worked. Didn't make much, a quarter, but got a quarter to buy you a hamburger and a malt at the Boogie Beat, which was right by the high school.
Boogie Beat.
Right across the street from the high school.
Okay. Dean, I want to thank you for joining us, and we're going to have to sit down and do this a few more times before we let you out of here. But for now, that's a wrap. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Legacy Santa Clara's Living History. I'm Leon Warden. Good night.